Okay, hello everyone. Good morning. I want to give you a very warm welcome to the second masterclass of our Digital Capitalism course. We are delighted to have so many sign up for this course. Week one was an amazing experience. We have almost 600 students for more than 60 countries participate. The first masterclass had more than 200 people connected and more than 60 questions were raised. Unfortunately, we were not able to answer all of them during the masterclass, but we do hope you find it useful and insightful. We hope whoever you are and whatever you know, that is a useful course. We are very open to feedback and suggestions to make it better, so feel free to contact us at any point by emailing at digitalcapitalism@tni.org. We know that with your support and feedback, we can keep improving the course so that it can become a great resource to support activists and movements fighting for social and environmental justice. Now, our second week has started. We are so excited about it, also because the issue about power was one of the biggest concerns in the forums and in the Q&As in the last masterclass. But before we dive into this second session, let me thank once more to our colleagues who have done so much effort putting this course together. So this course it's co-sponsored by IT for Change, Statewatch, and Somo, who has kindly helped us so much with this week materials. So these are our co-sponsors. We are really thankful for them and for their support. And we are TNI. We are a 50-year organization that tries to work towards social justice worldwide. So for us, the course and what are the units that we are going to see. So we already saw unit number 1, that is what is digital capitalism. That unit is already done. This week is big tech and the digital overlords. That it's the one that we are having on this session, but it's coming up in the weeks to come: digital colonialism, the geopolitics of data and development, the digital trade agenda, digitalization and the security of states. And then we ask ourselves, what's the alternative, the digital world we want to live in? These are the topics that we're going to be touching throughout our course. So now to us, who we are. I'm Sofia Scasserra. I'm going to be the host today, and also my colleagues who are helping, and we together are a team that has put this course together: Nick Buxton and Garavaglia and Jess Graham, that we are the people behind this course. And I want to give a huge round of applause and special thanks to both Guillermo Movia, who expertly set up the Moodle's website, and Tori Stocker, TNI's webmaster and computer legend, that are helping us with all the technical issues around this course. So for technologies, so we want, as TNI, for you to know that TNI has a policy to use whenever possible open source technologies. So this course was put together using Moodle, Nextcloud, Ubuntu, but this isn't always possible because of the monopoly of power of big tech, as we will explore in this course. And that's why, even though we would love to use open source for this masterclass, we have to rely on Zoom because it's the only tool that we find that it's good enough for this type of sessions that we're running today here. So now for this week's module, Big Tech and the Digital Overlords. So you have, I don't know if you all had access to the Moodle, but you have core readings, videos and essays, the quiz and the forum, and all the materials are going to be uploaded there already. And this week's masterclass is going to be recorded. It is being recorded, and it's going to be uploaded in the next hours or tomorrow to the Moodle, and it's going to be available there for you to watch again, share, or watch it if you haven't had the opportunity to be present here with us today. So next thing is that our goal this class is to start thinking a little bit about what big tech power is. But throughout the session, we will share with links to resources, further reading in the chat box. We also know that there's a lot of knowledge among attendees, so feel free to share your thoughts and links too in the Q&A and in the chat box, respectively, whether you think it's the right tool to use. So now to the session we're starting. So it is well known that digital capitalism bases its strategy on the monopolization of markets. Historically, big tech companies grew leverage with venture capital and grew until they reached a point of maturity that gave them profits. It was a bet of capitalists to get out of competitive schemes and enter into monopolistic schemes of value capture. Monopoly is a constituent feature of digital capitalism, and it is what makes it so difficult for us to use alternative technologies in many cases, limiting our ability to make a counter-offensive strategy. So to picture a little bit this, we have this phrase by the Peter Thiel, that is the CEO of PayPal. Well, it's gone, but I don't know if you would be able to read it, but it basically says that competition is for losers and competition is for losers. If you want to create and capture lasting value, look to build a monopoly. So that's what we're going to be speaking in this session. But for speaking within this session, I'm not going to be the person speaking. We have three experts on this material. I'm really glad to be joined by three great speakers who know a lot about monopolistic practice and from whom we're going to learn a lot. Our first speaker is Margarida Silva, researcher. She researched the power of big tech at the Center of Research of Multinational Corporations, SOMO. But before joining SOMO, she researched and campaigned against the political influence of big tech and other corporate sectors over European Union policymaking at Corporate Europe Observatory. Margarida holds a master's degree in political communication from Goldsmiths, University of London, and a bachelor in communication science, specialized in journalism from the Universidad de Porto. You can find her work at SOMO in the link we are posting in the chat. Then it's going to be Cecilia Rikap. She's the PhD in economics from the University of Buenos Aires, is associate professor in economics and head of research at intellectual property UCL. Until joining UCL, she was a permanent senior lecturer in international political economy at City University of London and a program director of the BSc in IPE at the same university. She's a tenure researcher at the CONICET, Argentina National Research Council, an associate researcher at COSTECH Lab, University Technology de Campaign. Cecilia's research is rooted in the international political economy of science and technology and the economics of innovation. She currently studies the rising concentration of intangible assets, things like knowledge, ideas, data, leading to the emergence of intellectual monopolies, among other from digital and pharma industry. The distribution of intellectual, including data, rents, resulting geopolitical tensions, and the effects of turning knowledge into assets. She has published 2 books on the topics: Capitalism, Power and Innovation, Intellectual Monopoly Capitalism Uncovered, which recently won a John Robinson Prize competition. The Digital Innovation Race is her second book, Conceptualizing the Emergence of New World Order, co-author with Lutval, which focus on the artificial intelligence race and clashes of power between US and Chinese big tech and US states and the Chinese states. And lastly, but not least, we have James Scheider, who is a political organizer, writing and communications director of the Progressive International, where he works on Make Amazon Pay campaign. Make Amazon Pay is a global movement that seeks to make Amazon pay its workers fairly, its fair share of taxes, and to end its negative impact on the planet. James co-founded the left-wing grassroots movement Momentum and was the UK Labour Party press secretary. He's the author of our blog, How We Win. So for this second session, we want to let our speakers give us an input of their experience and knowledge. So we start this conversation. Do add your questions to the Q&A if you have a question that you want to raise. So we're starting first with Margarida. Margarida, could you start with an overview of who the big corporate players are and the extent of their power in the digital capitalism that we're living in? So, Margarida, the floor is yours.
Yeah, let me start by thanking you for the invitation. It was really a pleasure to be here, and I really look forward to the discussion and questions that come up after. I have a small presentation. I'm just gonna try to share my screen. I hope you are seeing my PowerPoint. That's a yes. Okay, let me put it in a in a prettier way. Yeah, so today I will try and do sort of an overall introduction to the big tech companies, and especially how they developed their power and why nobody has stopped that, actually, why nobody stopped them in developing that power. And maybe we should start by asking why are we even zooming into big tech? First of all, of course, this is a popular term that we use to describe the companies that are leading the digital economy. We are often, when we use big tech, we often mean Amazon, Alphabet, Google, Meta, Microsoft, and Apple. Hopefully I didn't forget one. Sometimes this can be stretched to also include the Chinese big tech, whether that be Alibaba, Tencent, and ByteDance. Sometimes it also includes one or another company that comes in and out of this definition. But really the standard and core of what we talk about when we talk about big tech often means the five big US companies. And we concentrate on this because they are leading the digital economy, but not only. Actually, if we look at it, for instance, into a valuation of companies right now, these companies are actually leading the economy overall. It's not just the digital economy. If we think about how much they are valued in the public markets, or in the stock market, and we look at the top 7 companies in the world, we see that actually only one of these is not a technology company, and that's Saudi Aramco. All the other ones, we're talking about Microsoft, Apple, Nvidia, the chips maker, of course, had its fortunes rise now that we're experiencing a slight hype over generative AI that requires a lot of chips. Alphabet, Amazon, and Meta are all in the most valuable companies. Not only are they valuable, but they're extremely valuable. We're talking about $3 trillion now for Microsoft. Oh, that's an immense amount. This, of course, we can criticize, or we should take with a little bit of skepticism the public valuation of a company. But of course, this has also been reflected in the revenues. These companies command huge revenues, and in the profitability, they have quite big profit margins. We can also think about it in another way and look, for instance, into the Forbes richest people list. And now you will see that actually the list is heavily populated by big tech CEOs and founders. So you know that these companies are now actually leading the economy overall. I think that this is a pretty standard statement to make. So then the question becomes, why did a company like Microsoft start to become start to be valued at $3 trillion? How did they get here? And to that, this is, I believe, what has been happening. I think that big tech companies have basically implemented a deliberate, and I think deliberate is a very important part of this, a deliberate monopolization strategy. A little bit, if we go back and we think about what Sofia showed, the Peter Thiel quote of the competition is for losers, I think this was the ideology that actually guided the development of these companies. And in here, we can pick on a few trends or a few strategies or parts of the strategy that these companies have used, and they are more or less common to them. On one hand, they are either set up already as a platform or are increasingly platformizing. And this means that the company itself is intermediating between the interactions of different parts of the market. So you can think in the most straightforward way, social media is intermediating the exchange between social media users and advertisers. But you can also think, for instance, whether Amazon is intermediating online shoppers in getting in touch with independent sellers. Apple intermediates iPhone users getting in touch with app developers. So the companies are sitting in a sort of central position, which of course enables them to oversee and monitor an immense amount of interactions and get immense level of data. Now, platforms existed before. This is not an entirely new business model, but the level in which they are implemented, it's different. And maybe more importantly, the data that they can extract from this business model is completely unprecedented. With that, they've also prioritized the fast expansion. And again, this is the ideology of Peter Thiel. Competition is for losers. Facebook, for instance, knew that it had to really exploit and create these network effects, because otherwise it would go the way of MySpace and it would go the way of any other social network that had been before. I think famously, Mark Zuckerberg used to shout domination at the end of the meetings. This is really the sort of culture that permeated. The companies were for a really long time obsessed with the next 1 billion users. And they did this, they just put everything that they had to scale up as fast as possible, so that then they would corner the market and turn that into profit. I think Jeff Bezos at some point, well, not at some point, actually in the beginning, and it's sort of like Amazon lore now, where Jeff Bezos went to investors, and instead of saying like other companies were saying at the time, which is put the money into us and we'll give you profit quickly, they were actually saying, we will not give you profit immediately. It will take a while. We first need to go global. We need to take control of the whole market, and then we will return the shareholder value. So this is what's happened. And basically in doing this, they've locked in users and they cornered the entire markets. They've also developed some moats around their service. So they basically ensured that no competitor could come against them. They did this, for instance, by providing some free services or at cost services, or if we take Amazon, by providing something like Prime delivery, where they guarantee the next day delivery of your parcels, even though it doesn't make business sense or it's too costly to do so. But because they can do this, they bring more people into their markets, and they guarantee they don't go to competitors, and then they used other parts of the service to subsidize this. And I think that, well, I think you also probably talked about this in the first session, the fact that they had this overseeing role of the market, and because they were flush with money, they were able to spot whenever there would be a new competitive threat, whenever a new app, a new social media, a new company would appear that even looked likely that they could take over or that they could become competitors to them, the companies could easily just buy it. And here I think that the most famous example is Facebook taking over Instagram and WhatsApp, or they could kill it. Here also we could talk about how Facebook, for instance, spotted that there was an up-and-coming social network and then just basically decided to exclude it from its services, denying it of some important initial growth. All of this, I think, was complemented by basically a creation of a developing of soft power, heavy lobbying, good relationships with media, good relationships with academia. So by developing this strategy, basically the companies took over specific parts of the global tech stack. And here you can see that they really kind of managed to control entire parts of entire markets. And if you look at a company like Alphabet, you will see that now it's actually present not just in the sort of user layer, not just in the app layer, the thing that we interact with every day, but they're actually much deeper into the tech stack. They have, of course, the digital advertising. I think now everyone kind of knows that this is how they make money. They provide a social media service via YouTube. They have a search engine. And here, I think it's really remarkable that we have one company that controls 92% of the global market for search engine. They also control the mobile operating systems on your phone. So that's via Android, of course. They have a very significant stake in cloud. And it's not in this graph, but also they are increasingly entering the physical infrastructure, whether that be with the data centers and the server farms that you need to actually run the cloud, or the deep sea cables that actually are connecting the internet. So when the companies take care of these markets and they control it to this degree, they are basically then able to control who has access to the markets, and what are the rules that are actually guiding that market. And that can be taking, or that can take many shapes, of course. When you talk about social media, then we're likely talking about freedom of expression, or what does a company actually allowed as a legitimate speech within its own ecosystems. But you could also talk about, for instance, that this power basically enables them to extract the rents from people. And I think that there are two big ways that they can extract these rents. One is, of course, data rents, and the other one is financial rents. And let's just start by talking about data rents. So because the companies are now basically unavoidable, both for us as users, but as well for other businesses, for public services. If you want to be somehow in the digital sphere, you have to go through them in one way or another. They are basically able to impose a level of intrusive collection of data that is most famously and most controversially the case for private data, right? So you know that Facebook is tracking you all over the internet and on their website as well, and collecting and detailing and creating the detailed profiles of people, which they then are using to target services at you. That could be, for instance, that they could be targeting advertising to sell you sneakers, but it could also be sometimes to sell your far-right party, as happens very often. This is what we've been now describing as surveillance advertising. Is also this motor of what's often been called a surveillance capitalism. And we will see later on that it's actually it's the big driver of income, especially for Google and Facebook. And it's a system that is kind of permeating the internet overall now. But there are other ways in which these data rents can then be used also back into their growth strategy. So by being able to extract data, not just on the personal level, not just private data, but data from business competitors, data from public services, publicly owned data, the companies are able to then buy up competitors. They are able to copy products. This is something, for instance, that happens with Amazon, where Amazon is hosting sellers and is itself a seller, and then it gets access of privileged information over what is trending in the marketplace. So they can then basically just take care or get rid of any risk that you normally have in capitalist markets. They outsource it to the sellers, and they just copy and then compete with the people that actually took the risk in developing those products. They also gather and accumulate such an immense amount of data that is then needed to develop new products. For instance, as we are seeing right now with generative artificial intelligence, where the models require a huge amount of data to be trained. And in this way, they actually can be always or perpetuating their power. So it's not just about what they're doing right now, it's also about how this puts them in position to control in the future. Sorry. Here is just a quick note to show you that, surveillance advertising accounts for, I believe, somewhere between 70 to 80% of the revenue of Google and Facebook. And it is hugely profitable, right? So it's profit margins on this business are huge. At some point, it almost went to 40% on Facebook, which is much higher than in the rest of the economy, where I believe the average is about 10% for a profit margin. The other way, or the other type of rent that these companies can extract from those parties that are basically obliged to be in their markets, is financial rents. And this is fairly straightforward, but I think it's also an important thing to take into consideration, which is if you are now a seller, as I mentioned before, you want to sell your things online, in certain markets, for instance, in Germany and the US, where Amazon controls over 50% of the e-commerce market, you have to sell through Amazon. It's just sort of the logic of the dominance. So if you have to be there, then you are also completely vulnerable to the rules and to the decisions of Amazon. So that has enabled Amazon, for instance, to completely gear its website and its marketplace in a way that benefits itself, and in a way that ensures that sellers have to continuously buy more or pay for more and more fees and more services so that they can continue or remain to be visible to sellers. In this sense, or in the last few years, they were able to completely increase the amount of money that they charge these sellers to sell on their marketplace. It's now about 50% the cut of the entire third-party sellers' revenue that Amazon keeps for itself. In a similar way, Apple is charged up to 30% of all transactions to on the App Store to app developers. So you can see how, on the one hand, they take data rents, which enables them to grow and grow and grow and continuously be at the forefront of the market. But on the other hand, they are actually also taking financial rents. They are also using their position to basically impose a private tax on other companies. Here, just as a final thing, I will show you that this is from our research that we put out a few months ago, where we looked into the revenues of the sources of revenue for Amazon in Europe. And we saw that, of course, Amazon is mostly famous for selling things itself. And you can see that the retail sales are still pretty high. But these fees, this rent that it extracts from sellers is increasing. And it has been increasing for a few years. And even this is not entirely complete, because to that they have added advertising. So now if you go on Amazon, it used to be that you would see products ranked according to the quality and the price of the product. But now increasingly or companies are being told to pay to be ranked in a certain level. So this income that we see here of advertising, it's actually a bit of a misnomer. It should actually be more seen as part of this fees that are charged to sellers, because they are basically paying for visibility. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So if you put them together, you would see that actually sellers account for more about here of the income of Amazon in Europe. So I think I'm a little bit over my time, so I'll wrap up very quickly just by talking about, so why did nobody stop this from happening, right? The companies are new, some of the methods are new, but not all of it is new. And there were rules in place. We did have data protection rules before. We had anti-monopoly rules before. So why weren't they implemented? And I think a large part of this, or a large part of the answer has been the investment of the companies in lobbying. We can see it here. We are seeing how the big tech has increased the amount it spends at EU level, of course, to protect itself from new rules that were being put on the table. And right now, big tech accounts for the biggest, they are the biggest corporate lobbyists at EU level. The same is true in the US. We don't have data for other places, but we know of examples where there were rules put on the table in Brazil or in India, and immediately big tech just puts a lot of money to fight them. We also know that they are present and very active at the international level, whether WTO, UN, they are just kind of everywhere. But I think we also have to say that this sort of lobbying is a response and it's a reaction. But there was also an acceptance from the state and from the public that these companies should come and should be able to avoid the rules, in a large extent because they were good for the state surveillance apparatus as well. And in another way, because the companies had very close relationships with some administrations, for instance, the Obama administration, and even in the EU. I mean, the companies were offering free services of campaigning for these politicians. And at the same time, there was this sort of idea that this was such an innovative industry that nobody should even get in the way. We should just kind of let them grow, and there could be no problem that comes out of it. So I think we are really talking about corporate capture, in which there was an attempt to influence from the industry, but there was an acceptance to be influenced by the state as well. Maybe just to end, I will say that if we think about the strategy and the power the big tech has now as a deliberate strategy, then I think we can also think of it that it can be reverted. None of this is the natural or the only way that things have to be. All of it can be regulated and all of it can be reverted. I think I'm sorry, I'm super over the time.
No, it's fine, Margarida. It's fine, and also because you already answered a question that was raised in the Q&A part. So it's actually really good that you extended a little bit, and you already answered a question that it's about loving, and it was about the importance of loving in this world. I work, I work mainly on trade, and in the trade agenda, it's amazing the amount of lobby that you're seeing throughout the European Union. And now you have the AI Act, and everybody's so proud about their AI Act, and actually goes against the digital trade rules. And many people ask me, how is it possible that the EU officials like pass this great law and then they sign up for digital trade agreements which are against that law? And it's because of lobby and the huge amount of money they put on lobby to pass this type of rules. So it's good that you raised that up. So let's move forward, because the time, it's a tyranny here, and we need to move forward. So now to Cecilia. Cecilia, I love your work, but we will love for you to tell us a little bit more about what intellectual monopolies are and what that means in terms of constructing power among the big tech. So now, Cecilia, we would love to hear from you.
Okay, thank you, Sofia. Thanks everyone for being here. And when passing by, Margarida was mentioning that one of the reasons why, at least as a narrative, is said that these big tech companies cannot be regulated is because they are innovative, is because they innovate. And this is a quite established idea that big companies, not only big tech, but big companies in general, are an evil that we need to cope with simply because they are bringing innovation. And there is this established idea that innovation eventually will be diffused in different industries, in all the players of the industry, and then that will lead to economic growth. And we know today that not every form of economic growth is necessarily good, but still underlying this mindset, there is the idea that the world will be better for everyone. And therefore, we need to accept these big powers. What I'm going to discuss with you today is that these companies, by becoming intellectual monopolies, and big tech are the paradigmatic example, but not the only one. You can think, of course, of big pharma companies, and the case of the vaccine made it quite apparent how they behave as what I'm going to describe as intellectual monopolies, but there are many others. Intellectual monopolies is a label that actually suits the behavior of companies that go from McDonald's to Nestlé to IKEA. And also, as I was saying in the beginning, it's suitable to speak of large tech companies in general, so including, let's say, for instance, Netflix or Mercado Libre in Latin America. But big tech are special. Among these intellectual monopolies, as I will describe them in 1 second, big tech, these 5 tech companies from the US, and sometimes also including these large Chinese giants that emerge in the other part of the world, are special. So today, basically, what I'm going to try to share with you is one, what's an intellectual monopoly? Why they are not contributing to make the world better, and also why big tech are so special. And this will lead me to speak of the cutting edge technologies of our time, which are artificial intelligence and its interconnection with the cloud. So let me first very, very briefly give you a sort of summary of what's an intellectual monopoly. And I'm not referring here to companies that are market monopolies, necessarily, at least. In one of the slides from Margarida, one could clearly see that in the case of search engines, it's quite straightforward to say Google has a monopoly, a market monopoly. But in the other cases, it's not so straightforward. And actually, the definition of the market, the extent of the market, the frontiers of the market, is something that is always challenged, of course, challenged by these companies in particular. And I always give this, mention this joke that because Mark Zuckerberg, Facebook's or Meta these days founder, was claiming that Facebook in the end was part of the attention market, then Mark Zuckerberg is actually, or Facebook in particular, is competing with my mom, because my mom often tries to compete for my attention. So thinking of these companies in terms of market monopolies leads us to quite short-sighted understandings. They are definitely concentrating markets, but they are doing much more than that. And what I'm thinking of when I refer to these firms and others, as I was mentioning, as intellectual monopolies, is companies that are systematically concentrating what we call as intangible assets. So knowledge, data, information, all forms of knowledge that is used for brand building, knowledge that is used for science and technology, experiential knowledge. So all forms of knowledge are being captured by a few firms around the world. And among them, big tech are capturing AI and the cloud. So I'm already kind of giving you a spoiler alert about where I'm going. And of course, this has as an effect what I would describe as network market concentration. So it's not simply the concentration in one market, but if we think of global capitalism as a network of networks, many interconnected networks, and actually markets themselves can be seen as a network. Platforms, quite straightforwardly, are a case of networks. So we see the world as networks of networks. And what happens, and this is particularly the case of big tech, is that they are everywhere. But it's also the case of many other companies. Nestlé is another very straightforward example. Sometimes we don't know that a lot of the things that we are consuming daily are actually being manufactured by the same company. So this way of being present everywhere, of becoming omnipresent, relies on shared knowledge, relies on the fact that although we have different markets, the knowledge that underpins the capacity of certain firms to sell in those markets, to offer in those markets, is the same. The way Amazon's marketplace works is quite similar to the way that Google search engine works. Basically, they are processing a lot of data with artificial intelligence to do predictions, and through those predictions, either sell more things on Amazon's marketplace or give better results in a search engine that then will also include targeted advertising. So what I'm trying to say here is that what matters is to understand these companies not as companies that innovated once, but companies that are systematically trying to be better. And this leads me to my second point, because in this process of always trying to offer better products, or what seem to be better products for the consumers or users, big tech companies and intellectual monopolies in general show us that it's not the same to produce knowledge than to monetize knowledge. We have thousands of organizations around the world co-producing knowledge altogether. And I will show you in 1 second how AI is actually produced by thousands of organizations. However, when it comes to profiting from that collective production of knowledge, we see only a few firms systematically capturing that knowledge that was co-produced by many. So a way to face the argument that regulating these companies will be a detriment for innovation is to actually say that those innovating are not only these big tech companies, but society at large. Universities, public research organizations, a lot of other firms at the same time. Think of startups. It's a matter of who captures this knowledge, what is different. And when I speak of capturing the knowledge, I'm not only referring here to intellectual property rights. So I'm not just thinking of patents and the concentration of patents. I'm not just and not mainly referring to mergers and acquisitions. This is a quite established practice among every large firm, but there are many more things happening that are not as easy to observe, but that are at least as relevant as patents and mergers and acquisitions. And I will give you one example. Here you have a list of the organizations that were granted with the largest number of AI patents in 2022. If we only look at this list, one could conclude that the leader in AI is Toyota. And look where Microsoft, for instance, is. It's like 20-something. Does this mean that Toyota is more advanced or doing more AI than Microsoft? Certainly not. What it means is that patents are only one among the many appropriation mechanisms of knowledge. And therefore, we can not only look at patents, and the same could be said of merger and acquisitions, we can not only look at one way of capturing knowledge to conclude about these large companies. And actually, what I will try to show you is that big tech are controlling AI and the cloud from every possible angle. But before getting there, how do they do it? And how do they structure this co-creation of knowledge? I speak here of corporate innovation systems, and we could also say that these are networks at the same time, networks of many co-producing knowledge. And the corporate innovation system actually operates similar, for those of you who have heard the term national innovation system. There, we have many organizations inside a country or inside an economy producing all together innovation, taking different roles, and the key is the articulation, the connection. The same can be said of the corporate innovation system, with the difference that this architecture, this structure is being planned and organized by an intellectual monopoly. So basically, a corporate innovation system includes all the organizations that are co-creating knowledge, for instance, with Microsoft. And then Microsoft is the one that defines the R&D orientations, who's doing what, who knows what, and also it's the one harvesting most of the associated rents, intellectual rents of the successful results. So basically, you can think of knowledge as a puzzle. And what these companies do is split the pieces of the puzzle and strategically decide what's going to happen with each piece. So one piece will go to the MIT, and they will work with perhaps some Microsoft researchers or just by themselves on improving this and that. Another piece will be put in open source, and many developers around the world will be contributing to make it better. Another piece will be patented. Another piece will be perhaps developed in-house. Another piece will be developed in quote unquote strategic partnerships, even with another big tech, because they co-develop research together at the same time. And then it is the intellectual monopoly that recombines all the pieces, that puts the puzzle together and gets a sort of multiplier effect, because all these pieces of knowledge will only make real sense once they are put all together. So, okay, this is, if you believe me so far, you would say, okay, but this also happens if you know about it, this also happens, for instance, in the case of developments of new drugs. Pharmaceutical companies also outsource a lot of the R&D steps to universities, to startups, and then they are in charge of collecting all that and doing the clinical trials, and also convincing the regulators and convincing the physicians to prescribe the drug. So what is so special about artificial intelligence? And there is something about artificial intelligence that is not just that this technology can be used for everything. It can be used for drug development. It can be used for fraud prevention. It can be used for targeted advertising. It can be used for weapons and surveillance. So it's definitely a general purpose technology, but also artificial intelligence is a technology that has this capacity to get better by itself. The way in which artificial intelligence is done in the last 10 years or so is by feeding the algorithm a lot of data, more and more and more and more data. And the more data the algorithm processes, the better it gets. So this is a sort of means of production that gets better the more it is used. A larger training, a better algorithm. And this leads me to the role of not all the GAFAM companies, so not all the five, because Apple plays a quite marginal role in AI, and I can come back to Apple and why Apple is an intellectual monopoly and on what later on. But in particular, in the case of AI, we have Google, Amazon, Microsoft, and Meta monopolizing data, this crucial, indispensable part of artificial intelligence, but also all the AI knowledge, both research and coding. And on top of that, Amazon, Google, and Microsoft control the cloud. And the cloud is not simply a place where we store our photos. The cloud is also the place where all the software is being developed. In particular, is the place where AI is being developed and also where AI is being adopted. And this is a weak point for Meta. So artificial intelligence, in the end, once it is monopolized and controlled by a few companies from A to Z, because you've seen a control from research to application, leads to intellectual monopolies that are controlling a method of invention. If you want to do chemistry research, if you want to do life sciences research, if you even want to do financial research these days, you do it using artificial intelligence. So they control a new way of innovating. So let me just give you 3 insights on how they control, one, the whole AI research community, 2 coding, and within coding, I split it into 1 open source and 2 the AI startup in ecosystem. I know that this can be hard to follow, but I will just give you 2 insights on what I'm plotting in this slide. This slide is a network of the organizations that are presenting their research in the most important AI conferences in the world between 2018 and 2020. Of course, there are a lot of universities and public research organizations, but the 2 most important organizations nodes in this network are Microsoft in red, and Alphabet, so Google, in orange. Facebook is also in yellow, close to Alphabet, and Amazon is much smaller, and I can afterwards, if you're interested in this, explain why. But let me focus on Microsoft and Google. These 2 companies are controlling the whole AI research network, the frontier AI research network that then influences the research agenda of every single scholar or person doing AI research. And what is even more important is that Microsoft connects the red clusters, the clusters that are mostly integrated by Chinese organizations, with all the other clusters, which are clusters, these circles over here are clusters, which are clusters that are mostly populated by Western organizations, which means that Microsoft is the crucial gatekeeper, is the crucial bridge at the same time between all the frontier AI research that is being done inside China and what is being done in the rest of the world. So this is a crucial choke point, it's a crucial also panopticon view for the whole AI research network. And one could say, okay, it's cool, these companies are contributing with their research very widely. But then when it comes to look at what happens with patents, which are an indicator that already tells us a bit, but we know that not all of the ways in which this knowledge can be monetized, we see that even if a company like Microsoft is co-authoring publications with another organization in at least 9 out of 10 cases, so basically 88% of all the scientific publications that had one Microsoft author between 2012 and 2021 were also co-authored by another organization, which means that are the result of research done together with other organizations. Only 1% of Microsoft patents are co-owned with other organizations. So this is clear evidence of a knowledge predatory practice. But this is only the beginning, because they also control the open source community, which actually was created to counterbalance the power of proprietary software. And Microsoft, even one of its former executives, even said that open source was a cancer. But in 2014, Microsoft did a sort of U-turn and completely shifted its view about open source. And the same practice took place in the case of Meta and Google. And they're not only open to contributing to open source because this keeps employees happy, and they also get reusable code for their private solutions, and also because open source provides them quick feedback from the community, but also for other things. 1, because they can profit from free work. Let's go back to this idea of the puzzle. If you just put one piece of the puzzle in open source, and you receive a lot of contributions, but that piece of the puzzle will only make sense as something that can be monetized. Once it's put together, it's recombined with things that you keep secret, and you keep always changing because of the pace of innovation, then nobody else can profit from that free labor but you. And on top of that, the way to monetize this free software is actually by adding complementary services. This is the story of Android and how Google put Android in open source, managed to get it implemented in every single smartphone, but except for the iPhones, and then on top of that, managed to get its Play Store included, and also incurring into several misconducts or power abuses in the process. But this is also happening today with AI. And what ends up happening, and I will go to the quote, that this very long quote, in 1 second, but what the ultimate aim are the items 6 and 7. The ultimate aim is basically to create and control an ecosystem, to make their solutions the norm, the standard, to impose their solutions as standards, not because they are the best solutions, but simply because everyone is using them, because they are in open source, because they are free. And then start charging for something else that can even be offered by other companies, but they will be able to get a chunk. And to understand why they can charge those fees, we need to understand how all the technology is being produced. And this is clearly explained in the quote by Mark Zuckerberg. This is a quote that it's taken from the last quarterly report session, where he explains to the shareholders that were super worried, come on, the frontier technology are these large language models, and Meta is putting them in open source. How come? And very, very clearly and in different steps, Mark Zuckerberg explains what I have just explained to you, which are the reasons why Meta is putting in open source its models. Add to the picture that AI doesn't work without data and without processing power. AI is not simply code. AI is this triangle, this trinity between data, code, and compute. And if you don't have the three, there's nothing that you will be able to do. So open sourcing the code doesn't mean that other companies will be able to develop their own models and outpace Meta at all, because they would still need the data and also the compute, on top of having the talent to understand how all the model was created. And speaking of talent, there are a lot of startups out there.
Cecilia, please wrap up.
Yeah, I will.
But
No, absolutely, absolutely. There are a lot of startups out there. And I will just say that big tech companies are extremely active, to the point which in 2023, 2/3 of all the money that was put in the AI startup ecosystem came from the 3 companies that control the cloud: Amazon, Microsoft, and Google. And one thing to say about the cloud, and with this I close my presentation, is that the cloud, as I was saying in the beginning, is not simply a place to store data, but it is the place where a lot of software as a service is being consumed and is being used to develop all the software that we see around us. Uber, Mercado Libre, Netflix, all the platforms, but also all the companies like Toyota, Nestlé, IKEA, they all depend on the cloud and use cloud services as black boxes. Black boxes because they don't get access to the knowledge that is in the lines of code that they are purchasing. So basically, the cloud is not only intrinsically necessary to use and to develop AI, but it's also reproducing and expanding big tech control. And in this case, a control that in the end is arriving to every bit of global capitalism. So with this, I finish, and thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. I really love your work. It's so amazing. And it makes me think in a different way, but it's the Mariana Mazzucato book, you know, like the entrepreneurial state, where she tells a story about how these big tech companies like Apple grab a lot of knowledge that the US state produced in order to make the first iPhone. She tells it in a different way with the economic thinking, but the IP part and how they grab on the knowledge and how we think about innovation and these companies being innovative, and in the end, it's not so much. So it's really puzzling how we counterbalance not only their power but also their narratives. No. So for ending our first round of our speakers telling us their stories and their amazing work, we want to go to you, James. Now that we know the actors and we do know a little bit of how they construct their great power, their great monopoly, could you tell us about the Make Amazon Pay campaign, why they were target, what resistance has looked like, what are the lessons that we could learn for movements for taking on big tech companies? So up to you, and the floor is yours now, James.
Lovely. Thanks very much for having me and for the presentations we've had so far. It's been extremely interesting. The Make Amazon Pay campaign is a coalition now of about 80 organizations right around the world taking on Amazon. But it was formed in 2020 by two organizations coming together to launch it and then building the initial coalition. And those are the Progressive International, who I work for, and Uni Global Union, which is a trade union federation for service workers. So they are an alliance of trade unions representing about 20 million workers. And some of their members were already organizing in Amazon, for example, Verdi in Germany and so on. And the Progressive International, my organization, we just launched in May of 2020 with a mission to build a global infrastructure for progressive forces that would unite, organize, and mobilize them to be more than the sum of their parts. And we were scouting around for what would be a good first major campaign to test our theories, to test what we are thinking about. That progressive forces, we actually have many more resources and we are much stronger than we think. But often we're not we're not more than the sum of our parts. And more often than not, we are disarticulated by our opponents, but also by the fact that the system in which we struggle against affects people in different ways. People are divided by geography, by language, by sector, by issue, and so on. And for us, Amazon seemed like the right target for a number of reasons. Firstly, for all the reasons you've been hearing, it is right at the cutting edge of the global economy and of changes in the global economy. It's also completely household name. Everybody knows it. So if you're from a comms point of view, you're looking for a simple antagonism against somebody that everybody already knows, helps a lot. Amazon is global. We're an international. We want to do transnational labor organizing, and Amazon, of course, operates in lots of different countries. And through Amazon, through how you've been hearing, but also in further ways, it brings together so many different issues that we have to be able to simultaneously engage in to build popular power and turn back the tide of this rapacious, monopolistic capitalism that we're seeing. So it brings together lots of issues. Of course, labor issues, but many different types of labor issues, because you can go from there's a very small number of tech workers who are in Silicon Valley through to the much larger number of tech workers, as in workers who are working with tech, who are on piecework, who are outsourced, who might work for very small amounts of money in Kenya and other places like that, through warehouse workers who are quite visible, to other types of workers who are completely invisible. Outsourced call centers in the Philippines or Colombia. The Amazon is the biggest clothes seller in the US. It has this huge supply chain of factories in South Asia that you don't think about when you think of Amazon being a company. So we started to think of it like Amazon was like this iceberg, and this iceberg that was coming to crash into more and more parts of the world. And it's nice because you can only see the top of it, but we wanted to make more of it more visible, because it's not only labor issues which are so central to what Amazon is doing. Jeff Bezos does a lot of greenwashing. Once they in response actually to labor organizing, there's a group of tech workers, Amazon tech workers, called Amazon Employees for Climate Justice. And in 2018, they complained to the company and they staged a walkout, and they said that the company should be a climate leader. And in response to that, Jeff Bezos and Amazon, they announced that Amazon had this fantastic plan. It was going to be net zero by 2040. It was going to publish all of this data. And then they proceeded to expand their emissions by 40% over the next 2 years. and Amazon only accounts for the emissions of 1% of the products sold on its platform. So, we thought that Amazon was a great way to engage to challenge greenwashing and also the environmental crisis in so many different forms, because Amazon is involved in huge energy use. The data center use is tremendous. And this is within the iceberg that is subterranean. Most people don't see this. There's a struggle going on right now in Dublin, in the capital of Ireland, because there's a threat that the amount of electricity the new data center is going to use could either pushes Ireland completely beyond the possibility of meeting its climate obligations, or could lead to blackouts or brownouts in Dublin, in a capital city. Then there are many other issues. I mean, tax is a extremely major one, and understandably really pisses people off, because Amazon is phenomenally impressive at not paying very much tax. It, like many other multinationals that operates in huge numbers of jurisdictions, is able to shift its profits, to take advantage of loopholes and subsidies provided by different states, and it does so extremely effectively. Then there are the privacy issues, which you have been hearing about, privacy issues within big tech, also its relationship to the surveillance state. This is also, there are issues of racial justice, not only connected to the state, but how the services are used. And then there are colonial questions as well. And the colonial questions are quite diverse. I mean, for example, there's the issue of Palestine, where Amazon Web Services provides, in a joint contract with Google, Project Nimbus, which provides cloud computing and other support for the Israeli military. Or another example is Amazon's building its Africa regional headquarter, or it has been built now, on sacred lands to the indigenous Khoi and San people from the Western Cape of South Africa. So again and again, you see all these very different issues. They seem very different. People's resistance to them is quite different. It often happens in different languages, within different discourses, with different types of activists, but they all have this same potential enemy. So we selected Amazon, and our task of trying to bring these things all together into one single line of antagonism. And with the understanding very clearly that, yes, Amazon is a digital giant, but the digital world is physical. I mean, not only because there are actual workers, that it is still selling products that are produced, but the cloud doesn't exist out there. The cloud is physical infrastructure. It is the data centers. It is real things. And I think part of the mystique of big tech, and I think they try to sell this, is the idea that they're operating in an economy that's so advanced and so removed from the one that we operate in that we just sort of have to let them do it. And actually, that really isn't the case at all. So that's why we chose Amazon, and then set about trying to create this coalition, which was based in labour power. It's based in all the different trade unions, most of the trade unions that are organising within Amazon. But we started from what I call a verbs not nouns approach, which is, if you start with all of those different issues that I laid out, and then take into account all the different national contexts and all the different political contexts and histories that those take place in, to come up with a completely shared understanding, a completely shared analysis, would be impossible. And if you started from that, we would still be arguing about it now, 4 years on. So instead, you take the things that there are shared things, there's similarities in people's understanding with Amazon, and try to find things that people can do together, and through taking action together, to form a broader idea of what Amazon is. So you get from someone who's a warehouse worker, their understanding of Amazon is basically in the warehouse, to that being connected to their part of the supply chain with warehouse workers, in other parts of the country and in other countries, and so on and so on. grows. So the other thing we wanted to do was use Amazon's size against it, in the same way that Amazon is hard to organize against in some ways. It's not like a huge factory of old where everything is concentrated, but because so many people know it, it gains so much media attention that an action can have outsized communicative power. At least that's what we hoped. So what we decided to do was have a global day of action, which would be physical, because we launched in 2020. It was the peak of COVID. Everyone was locked inside. So we knew that firstly, people taking action in the real world was much more media, we would attract more media attention. And then doing something on Black Friday. Black Friday is this ghastly US-American invention of a shopping holiday, a holiday to glorify buying stuff. And it happens the day after, what's it called? Thanksgiving, where they say, isn't it great that they genocided the native population? Anyway, so on that day, it's a very, very good comms day, because there's huge amounts of space in broadcasters' news agendas, because they have to cover this story. And it's basically a very boring story, same story every year. Loads of people go shopping. Some businesses report that there are more people shopping this year than last year. So if you can give them an alternative story, it will gain more attention than it would if it happened the day before or the day after. And so in that first year, we knew that workers in Germany were going to go on strike, and we could try to stimulate some worker action in a few other countries, and then couple that with protests against the company. So that's what we organised in that first year, in November 2020. And we managed to organise actions in 15 countries of various different sizes. Some were strikes, some were short worker actions. We had some protests. We brought them all together under the slogan, "Make Amazon Pay," because again, it can articulate the most number of those issues within it. Make Amazon pay its workers, make Amazon pay for its environmental destruction, make Amazon pay its taxes, and so on. And we had coordinated projections of our twisting the Amazon logo into the Make Amazon Pay logo, projected onto their headquarters in, I think, 5 or 6, in 1, 2, 3, 4, in 6 places. And this was enough to get the thing moving. And it showed within it, I think, how you can bring together really quite different groups to struggle over the same issue to some effect. I'll give one small example, which was Jeff Bezos's personal wealth in those first 6 months of the pandemic increased so much that he could have personally paid every single Amazon employee a bonus of $68,000 each, and still be as rich as he was at the beginning of the pandemic. And people knew that because it's in the news every day. Jeff Bezos is now the world's richest man. Amazon is making so much money, its share price is going up. And so under the pressure that workers organising and also our campaign put, Amazon offered these bonuses to workers, sort of derisory Christmas bonuses. And the workers in Poland were offered less than the workers in Germany just over the border for doing the same work. And of course, they didn't want to put up with that. So then there was a news strike at a warehouse in Poland. So far sounds so normal, but this action brought together Amazon Workers International, which is a horizontal union, and a kind of non-traditional horizontal worker-led union, with Solidarity, which is the main traditional, more vertically orientated union. Those two unions often don't particularly get on. And Solidarity organises a lot of coal workers, so they're very big in the fossil fuel industry, with Greenpeace, who of course organise on issues of the climate. And they came together and they blockaded the warehouse, and they won an increase in the bonus for the workers. I realise I don't have very much time. I should speed up. Is that right? Yes.
Yeah.
I will fast forward very quickly. Anyway, to speed things up, or to bring them up to date, we've now been running these global days of action each year since 2020, and each year they get bigger and bigger in basically every metric. More countries. The last year we had 36 countries. We had 250 strikes and actions, across the world, all on the same day. Thousands of workers out on strike. Pretty much all the warehouse workers in Germany and Spain were out on strike at the same time, and much more media attention, much more worry for Amazon, which is very conscious of its of how it's viewed. And they're right to be very conscious of how they're viewed, because we've done some polling. We did some polling at the beginning of the campaign. We've done some polling since about public attitudes towards Amazon. And people really like Amazon because they really like the product that they get. They really like the service. But then you ask them about how Amazon is on basically any of these issues, and they say Amazon is terrible and needs to do much better. So Amazon is right to be Amazon is right to think people like our product, and they are also right to think, but the potential force against us for improving pay and working conditions, for paying our taxes, for not wrecking the environment, and so on, is large. And Amazon operates. They have this, of course, massive expansionist logic, but they also cut their cloth to the regulatory framework in which they're in. Or to put it in more everyday speak, they do what they can get away with. So in the US, where you can get away with a lot, they are incredibly anti-union. In the UK, where you can get away with most things, they're very anti-union. In Sweden, where you can't get away with so much, when they entered the country, they entered with a trade union collective bargaining agreement with a trade union. That's not to say that they are nice people that want to do the right thing. In fact, it's quite the opposite. But it shows that they are responsive to pressure when they're forced to be responsive to pressure, but they'll always push as far as they can get. So that's why throughout the campaign we've tried to, and have rather successfully, I hope, brought in political support. The second action we took a week after the first action was to coordinate a letter from over 400 parliamentarians from 30-odd countries, a letter to Jeff Bezos saying that they've read the demands, they've seen the actions of workers and citizens around the world, and they will take those actions up in their respective parliaments. So just to finish very, very quickly, maybe we'll go into more questions. The lessons for movements taking on big tech is these are real things. They're not, out in the ether. They're physical. They have real people that do real things within them. That is a source of power. That the people that work within them can be organized. That because they are household names, to build a campaign against them is helped tremendously. You can use the fact that these are household names and the media are interested in them against them. And to bring together, the way to be most sensitive to bring together all these various different issues is to find things that people can do together. And that strengthens the bonds between them, and that improves everybody's analysis. Everybody comes from with their head from their particular struggle that they know most about, or their framework they know most about. And people are most generous in listening to other people's and building stronger collective ones when they're doing something together. So I'll end there.
Thank you, James. Yeah, we are a little bit ahead of time, but it was really interesting. The three conversations that we had with you, the three inputs were really good, and it makes me think about Walmart. Walmart as a retail giant many years ago was kind of the same, you know, in the countries where you have trade unions, they comply with trade unions, they had no problem, and countries where, like United States, they were super anti-union, super strong. They even shut down the stores whenever somebody tried to make a union, and well, it's kind of the same old story, you know. So I would love to open up a little bit for questions. I prepare some myself, and I don't know if Nick some had, but as we are running out of time, if Pia, can you just like pick one or two and bring them here to see if we can answer them?
Yes, of course, Sofia. Well, hey everyone. Thank you all for your questions and inputs once again. I love how much you participate. Thanks to all the speakers and your inputs, your presentations. They were really insightful. And yeah, I will pick just two questions up just to for you to answer. First of all, we got a really important question about threats faced by the activists and you as researchers and all the actions you made. I think it's a crucial issue and it needs some serious attention. So if any of you would like to share your experiences, it would be very interesting. And I think it would be really important for you to be able to do that. And then also with tech moving at lightning speed, I think there's a real worry that the rules and the regulations can keep up with how quickly they advance. So especially how can we make sure that the laws can cope? But one that seemed pretty interesting in that matter is that whether there's any hope in using AI itself to fight back, to use the AI tools to fight back against the big tech's power. In other words, could turning their own tools against them be a game changer, or is it just wishful thinking? So why don't we start with you, Margarida, and then keep up with the rest as you presented. Thank you.
Yeah, so on the threats question, I'm happy to say I've never been threatened by any big tech companies and actually any other company that we've ever worked against. Though I also say that I've always worked in organizations that made a very explicit point of not ever receiving any funding from corporations, period. But then, of course, that includes big tech companies. Because if we then look into the civil society, I think, is changing slightly, but for a long time, civil society, especially in the digital rights field, was heavily funded by big tech companies. And that meant that big tech could kind of use that as a threat, not that they would come and say, we will give you money if you do this, but I think it was more of the opposite, where if you start saying this, we can withdraw the money, and then that's kind of an issue. We saw this as well in think tanks. We saw people very famously in the US being fired because they I think something super small where I think Barry Lynn from the Open Markets Institute is actually a very pro-market institution, but I think he got fired from one think tank because he just complimented one very mild decision from DG Competition in the EU against Google. So these other things are a little bit how I see the big tech company flexing its muscle against critics. But of course, if you don't take the money from them, then you're a little bit isolated or shielded from that. On the issue of how the laws can keep up with big tech, I mean, first thing is that there are many laws that we already have been working on or that already existed that we can simply implement, things like data protection, for instance, and even just implementing some fairly old school antitrust measures. You can put those into place and then you can already limit some of the harms. Will there be a need for some specific new regulation? I think so, but that doesn't mean that we shouldn't already use the tools that we already have. Beyond that, I think that we need to look at what are the layers that are not regulated, but that actually do give a lot of power to the companies. And I think that, for instance, in Cecilia's presentation, it came the cloud. right? I think this is one of the areas where we have not seen actually that much regulatory action, where we have seen it was actually not very good, like the US Cloud Act. So I think that we need to actually break up some of the power that the companies have in leveraging the cloud to dominate other fields, like the generative AI, for instance. And then very briefly, I think we need to just to change the way the policy making itself is working. So you want to get corporate interests out of the secret negotiations. You want to get lobbying limited and have less and less of an influence on the policy making field, and that will change entirely even the voices were heard, and I think the outcome as well.
Okay, so I will go very briefly and I will do something which is to share one slide that I skipped, which is this one. And of course, I do not pretend to provide a sort of recipe or answer. I think that this is actually something that we need to discuss collectively. And I'm a very big fan of the Amazon Pay campaign, precisely because it puts into the conversation a lot of organizations fighting together. But if we have to think of what not to do and what could be done, and just as a footnote, I was never threatened by these companies. I don't think it's their style anyway. They are much more proficient and sophisticated in the ways they do lobby, to the point which they use other companies to do lobby for them. For instance, they do not threaten directly people fighting against them, and they may even give them a voice, because the way of thinking is that they are super powerful and in the end will come around and still be on the top. But going to the other part of the questions, and just because it addresses a few other things, I don't think that we can just keep with the tool set that we have at the moment, because that backfires. Basically, let's say we put more money into public science and technology. If all that then goes to scientific publications with big tech, or not without big tech, but with big tech agenda, and then they are just public out there, and big tech uses them for their own businesses, we're just reinforcing the same vicious circle. And the same can be said of other things. In terms of antitrust, a crucial change is that these companies are not simply concentrating a market or their main segment of operation, but they are actually exercising what I would describe as network concentration. They're concentrating global capitalism. There's a form of economic concentration that is interconnected and that is exercised through talk points, through panopticons, overseeing everything that is going on and capturing whatever it's useful for reinforcing their power. So I think that we need to, in the case of antitrust, a very simple thing is to start thinking more about networks, markets as networks of networks, and not just as single individual markets. But if you want to go beyond that, I think that there are two things that could be done. One is taxing big tech. Yes, it can be taxing revenues. It's probably more efficient, in particular because of the way these companies avoid taxes and where they are declaring the taxes at the same time. So if we want to be more equitable, we should also think of taxing revenues as a proxy for taxing the hidden profits. But also, and this goes directly to things that were saying both James and Margarida in her intervention a second ago, compute as utility. Think of the digital infrastructure as the same as the water pipes, as electricity. And saying this in the UK, where everything has been privatized, is perhaps not the best thing to say, but think of it from the countries where it's a public good and how it should work. But if we want much more, I think that what could be done, if we want to do an AI, and this goes straight to the question, if we want to do AI for the people, AI for the common good, AI that fights back, we need to bring talent back. Because all the scientists that were leading this wave of artificial intelligence, generative AI and others, are directly or indirectly linked to big tech. And on top of that, I think that, and this just really, really, if we want to be revolutionary, there are other things that we can do. One is build solidarity. We need more solidarity to share our data If we think, for instance, of what can be done in terms of AI for the people or for the public good, one could be precisely analyzing healthcare data together with data about geographical information, together with social data, and put all that together to, in a way, kind of consider the social determinants and also assess the socio-environmental factors that contribute to diseases. For instance, very concrete example, the places where there are a lot of herbicides being thrown to grow crops are places where there is a higher incidence of cancer. And this with AI can be clearly mapped in the world and clearly show that the people is getting sicker around the places where there are more herbicides. But for that, we need to share our data. So instead of thinking of privatizing data, private data, my own data can be altogether pooled, of course, with the necessary governing structures to do things for good. And if we want just like much more, what these companies are doing is planning the world. They are not establishing market exchanges. They plan the world.
We need to finish, please. We have
So,
4 minutes.
so just democratic planning would be for me that the way forward really, really in the long run.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, James.
I'll just end by talking about power, because really what you're seeing here, our problem is not technology. Our problem is not the fact that exactly as Celia was saying, Amazon and other companies like this are building a privatized form of extremely high-tech planning. The problem is who they can do that for, and that's a question of power. They're doing it against all of these people who have, all the different issues that we've discussed over the last 90 minutes. And so our job, I think, as organizers, is to make each of those different groups more powerful so that the policy options become more available. More of them become available. There's a scale of things that can be done. And I think the more that is built, the more you open up the possibility of having public AI, of having democratic, large-scale, ecological, pro-social planning that uses some of the amazing stuff. Like, Amazon knows that there's going to be a run on sieves in Sheffield next week. It doesn't even know how it knows that, but it does know that. It sends random items around the world ahead of time because its algorithm tells it that's where there's going to be desire. That's amazing. That's really amazing. The problem is that there is exploitation and abuse at every single step along that chain. The problem isn't with the technology, it's who owns it, how they use it, and how they use it against us.
Thank you, James. Yeah, I have my own also personal experience, and I can tell that the strategies of big tech against the researchers and the activists is much more sophisticated. We have to be aware that they lobby governments, and in my case, for example, was the Argentine government, my own government, spying on me when the WTO ministerial came to Buenos Aires. So a lot of times they have like these sophisticated structures of putting their interest and saying this should not be passed, and the governments do the rest. No, this is something that also happens. So I wanted to point that out, that it's also through the governments that they do this kind of harassment to activists. Well, thank you all for the whole TNI team for their great organization support. And this was our second masterclass. Next week, the themes of the course will be digital colonialism, the geopolitics of data and development. On Monday, the module will be open on our course website with lots of great educational resources to read and learn from. Then on Wednesday, 17th, at the same time as today, we'll be joined by the masterclass with Ulises Mejias, Professor of Communication Studies at Sunny Osego, co-founder of Non-Aligned Technologies Movement, and co-author of Datagraph, the New Colonialism of Big Tech and How to Fight Back. Paola Ricaurte, Associate Professor of the Department of Media and Digital Culture at Tecnológico de Monterrey, co-founder of Tierra Común, dedicated to decolonizing data, and regional coordinator of Feminist AI Research Network, and Nadine Shami, Deputy Director of IT for Change and researcher of digital rights and development and the political economy of women's rights in the information society. So thank you once again for joining us. Please take one quick minute to fill in a poll on your screens. That it will give us information to evaluate the session. We will also leave the chat open for a few minutes so you can wrap up the conversations if you have. And again, any suggestions from improvement, do not hesitate to email us at digitalcapitalism@tni.org. Thank you so much, Cecilia, Margarida, and James. I'm sorry I had to cut it. It's my job, but it was so interesting, the 3 inputs, and I was so sorry to cut them because they were really, really interesting. And I think we learned a lot from this masterclass. So thank you again for joining us in this collective effort of putting together this digital capitalism course from TNI with our partners, SOMO, Statewatch, and IT for Change. Thank you again so much. Have a nice rest of the day and a nice week. And thank you all for joining us. And we'll hope to see you again next Wednesday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye, bye, bye.
Bye. I'm so sorry that you had to cut me. I'm so sorry, so sorry.
Love you, Cecilia.
Bye-bye. Take care.